Even though the Zamazenta side of a team maybe doesn't have quite as advantageous of matchups.
All right, well, we are heading into this incredible round 6 matchup. Marco Silva versus Luca Ceribelli. That's going to be the Zamazenta and Rillaboom for Marco, while Luca will lead with both restricteds, the Miraidon and the Lunala. So immediately setting up the big damage potential from the Miraidon, but going to lose this terrain after activating the Electric Seed on Lunala thanks to the Rillaboom's grassy terrain.
Yeah, pretty exciting start to this game here where you have 4 Pokemon in the field and 3 restrictions apply, all but 1 restricted Pokemon immediately out here. Rillaboom having that terrain advantage is pretty big because of that, you're likely going to want to try to cycle this Miraidon. Maybe you could try to get something cheeky, threatening the Fake Out, lots of fun options. The flip side, of course, is that Zamazenta does not like threatening a ton of damage into that Lunala slot, so it's a little freer to do whatever it wants to do. Perhaps especially if this is a transition into the Trick Room, which would be pretty hard to oppose with this group of Pokemon.
Yeah, no way to prevent a Trick Room, but also opting not to prevent any damage coming out from the Miraidon on Luca's side. Dealing just a little bit over half damage to the Zamazenta. Squish, the Zamazenta takes Miraidon down to just about a quarter of its health, while the Moongeist Beam from Lunala doesn't pick up the KO. The Zamazenta hangs on with 1 health, and Miraidon also just barely hanging on after that U-turn from the Rillaboom. Both of these trainers do not want their both of these Pokemon don't want their trainers to be disappointed.
Yeah, potentially both sides getting some great information here as they both narrowly survive those attacks. But once again, we see one of these situations where a low HP Pokemon doesn't quite get knocked out, and Calyrex doesn't mind that too much, right? As the option now on this next turn to go on the offense here. Lunala not really going to enjoy that either. It still has its Shadow Shield ability intact, so it's not like going to get one shot or anything, but it's still not liking facing down this Calyrex, and going to require some quick switches for Luca, although with the Pokemon we see in the back, has quite some interesting options for switching into a Calyrex.
Oh, but there is no way to avoid the guessing game here of is it going to be the Psychic or the Astral Barrage coming out from Marco's Shadow Rider. Of course, the safest switch being the Incineroar because it can resist at least the Astral Barrage, but opens itself up to damage from the Zamazenta. So very interesting positioning here as Luca will retreat the Miraidon for that Incineroar. That will get an Intimidate down onto the Zamazenta, which will prevent even more damage to the Lunala from, for example, the Heavy Slam that Zamazenta is running, as we see our first Terrassalization of the game. That's going to be the Lunala, goes into the Fairy typing, now potentially weak to a Heavy Slam from the Zamazenta, so good call there to make sure that you are lowering the attack of that Pokemon to protect your Lunala. There's the Astral Barrage. Decent damage to both Pokemon considering the Shadow Shield ability with that Life Orb, and the Zamazenta does follow up with the Heavy Slam, but the Incineroar's Intimidate allows Lunala to handily tank that. Ooh, and that's a Moongeist Beam into the Zamazenta. The Calyrex was open to a big Ghost-type attack, but did not go for it. Luca instead just cleaning up the Zamazenta.
Yeah, probably nothing too upsetting there where, the low HP Zamazenta kind of being checked by the Lunala, getting off the field helps a little bit. Gets a decent bit of damage where now only like one more little tap and you're putting it in knockout range for the Calyrex at least, or maybe you play it a little bit slower and try to hit it twice. And also, offers a air quotes free switch, or nothing free about giving up a KO, but sometimes better than having it. Yeah, especially at a restricted Pokemon. But yeah, I mean, still, having it out in the field where it's kind of not creating a whole lot of favorable board position could be helpful. Taking some time here to think about the Pokemon coming in here. It's going to be the Incineroar coming in, going to drop an Intimidate on its opposite number, and threaten to Fake Out on this Lunala, who's now no longer immune to Fake Out as a now Fairy type Pokemon.
Yeah, absolutely vulnerable to Fake Out on both sides there. The Incineroar or the Lunala potentially able to protect that Calyrex just a little bit. Still no Terrassalization used on Marco's side, so there's always the option for Calyrex to Terrassalize into that Dark type and protect itself from some of this damage. Incineroar will retreat for Luca, however, going to continue to cycle Intimidates and cycle Fake Out Pressure. That's going to be the Ursaluna switching in here on Luca's side, going to tank that Fake Out from the Incineroar, while Psychic from Calyrex will connect onto the Lunala. That's good damage, but 7 hit points means Lunala hangs on, and that means this Moongeist Beam will absolutely connect into that Calyrex. That's going to be a easy KO after the Life Orb recoil and 4 times super effective damage.
Yeah, we've seen some matches this weekend where, I guess weekday, where the restricted Pokemon went down early and the positions in the back were still good enough where the player could come out on top, but that's going to be tough. Both restricted Pokemon down now. Ursaluna getting burned for free. Rillaboom going to come here and enjoy the very end of its terrain, but there still is that Miraidon in the back and the Incineroar who's now going to be able to come in, probably intimidate these Pokemon unchecked, and could very feasibly even start cycling some Intimidates here. Just an excellent start to the game for Luca. Critically surviving twice now with low HP, allowing him to make some very favorable trades.
Yeah, all of these Pokemon have been hanging on by just a thread after all of these big hits from the restricted Pokemon. Ursaluna, like you mentioned, will opt to switch out in favor of the Incineroar to start getting those Intimidates down onto the 2 physical attackers on Marco's side. Luca has some pretty weak, Lunala's only got 21 hit points right now, is the fastest thing on the field though, which means it gets to fire off this Moongeist Beam into Rillaboom, deals just a little bit of damage back to it, but will be traded for that Wood Hammer as Lunala goes down. The first Pokemon that Luca has lost in this game. And Marco Silva, unfortunately, with just the Rillaboom and the Incineroar, is going to be struggling really hard to break through this Miraidon in the back.
See a knockoff there, so at least getting to remove the item, but since it's the Assault Vest, wasn't really doing anything against either of these Pokemon anyway.
All it did was weaken a future knockoff.
Yeah, which, oops. Miraidon going to come in here and going to gain control of the terrain for the remainder of this matchup. It could potentially matter a little bit, really just stopping the healing in what otherwise is going to be a little bit of a slow end game, but a very favorable position for Luca. That Incineroar is going to be very difficult to defeat, not going to have any way to avoid the Miraidon getting at least one more attack off as well, though I'd assume we will see a Volt Switch here in order to get at least one additional attack after that, and even the Ursaluna sort of an interesting spot where if you were to knock out this Rillaboom, it could kind of come in and finish off the Incineroar for you, so just a matter of prioritization, right? Especially now that we've seen this fire terrestrialization, the Incineroar on Luca's side no longer looking so offensively gifted either.
Well, that's just going to be an Electro Drift into the Incineroar. That will be a one-hit KO, but the Rocky Helmet will trade damage back on to the Miraidon, which was at such low health from the previous turns that it will go down to the recoil. That means that it's going to be Rillaboom with this Wood Hammer dealing a pittance of damage to Luca's Incineroar and has the Ursaluna in the back. So this Flare Blitz actually dealt pretty good damage into that Fire Terra Rillaboom. No chance here for this Rillaboom to be able to come back against both of these Pokemon.
Yeah, the struggle here too is I don't know if Grassy Glide would be enough to knock the Ursaluna out. If you Wood Hammer, you're going to be forfeiting the game by knocking yourself out here. The disadvantage of the recoil. We're going to see
let's see. Well, after the Intimidates, even not enough to KO the Ursaluna, even with Wood Hammer. The benefit is you don't knock yourself out. Incineroar gets to do it with a critical hit knockoff as Luca Ceribelli will defeat Marco Silva in Game 1. That's going to mean that Marco is going to need to make some changes here to keep up with the pressure that Luca was putting on. Yeah,
I'm curious if the trainers learned that their Pokemon were trained, maybe their opponent's Pokemon were trained a little differently than they're expecting, or just kind of like didn't get the reads they're hoping for here. To me, it seems like both trainers were playing pretty quickly there. I kind of wonder if they haven't scrimmed this matchup a few times before where I felt like they weren't being thoughtful, I guess, but it just like it felt the tempo of this didn't feel super game one-y to me.
Wow. Just back to back to back, single-digit health survives on all of these Pokemon. Really made the difference there, just being able to continue to hang on for one extra turn, get one extra Volt Switch off, get one extra Moongeist Beam off, especially there, able to take out the Calyrex. And Marco was playing so aggressive with that Calyrex Shadow Rider, never even, never clicking the Terrestrialization button, saving that for the Rillaboom by the end. Leaving it very vulnerable, and at one point, Luca just had to say, okay, if you're going to give me the Calyrex, I'm going to take it.
Yeah, I mean, I actually kind of like the reads on Marco's side, even though they didn't work. It seemed like he largely got Luca to make the plays that he wanted to make. It just, it turned out the math didn't actually work to convert those plays because he wasn't able to pick up the knockouts. I think that's kind of interesting how this sets up the second game, right? Where Luca maybe doesn't need to adjust so much from that end where like the path that they took led to him winning, but I don't know if he's going through the game feeling like he necessarily like won the reads where either, A, it's like the Pokemon really were trained in a way where you always survive those and like it's kind of a team diff, or B, you gotta be a little careful. Like, okay, well, like he was a little bit in my head maybe, or if it wasn't a bait and he got away with it. So like, do you play a little more aggressively this game, kind of assuming that you get the same pace from Marco? Just Marco try to slow it down a little bit, maybe try to get some chips so he actually picks those knockups out. But we see a very similar start to the game. On one side of the field, well, it's the winning player who does make the adjustment.
Yeah, that's going to be the Choice Band Urshifu and the Whimsicott for Luca going up against that Zamazenta and Rillaboom from Game 1 from Marco. So opting to have, or at least threaten a Tailwind mode here from the Whimsicott and making big adjustments to the Pokemon that were brought. That means most likely no Ursaluna and also no Incineroar in the back, or leaving one of the two restricteds at home.
Yeah, I'm really interested because Incineroar was such a great tool for closing the game last time. But I think maybe that does hint to us that perhaps that game did not go quite the way Luca was hoping it did in the first game, making a larger adjustment here. Unlike Marco, we're getting to see the audience here that it is Incineroar that was left at home. So, hey, these two physical Pokemon would not have liked to see Incineroar come in. We'll have to see if Miraidon can make the same difference. This time switching in after the Rillaboom and getting control of the terrain to start out the match.
Yeah, gaining control of the terrain, so important for this Miraidon, and also important for Marco and the Rillaboom as Rillaboom switches out for Incineroar. Marco says, hey, I'm not going to leave the best Pokemon in the meta at home. I'm bringing Incineroar every time, and gets an Intimidate down onto that Choice Band Urshifu, and forces the Terastallization out of that Pokemon with the Fake Out pressure from that Rillaboom. So here, Luca has now a Ghost Terra on the Urshifu and will take a Heavy Slam to the Miraidon on the switch-in. The U-turn, though, means that it will just be able to bounce back, take a little bit of Rocky Helmet, chip damage, and then we'll see what Luca wants to bring in next. Could bring in the Whimsicott for Encore Pressure or Tailwind, or could bring in the Lunala and potentially get that Electric Seed activation off.
Whimsicott is the one coming in, so maybe trying to deter a potential fake out here. Otherwise very effective against this Choice Specs Miraidon, although we saw, Zamazenta could do some significant damage with the body press, but probably not threatening a knockout yet. And we also saw, you kind of mentioned the Terastallization being forced on Luca's side of the field, but also there was the switch forced on Marco's side of the field, kind of paying the tax of having won the turn 1 terrain battle, knowing that Miraidon likely coming in, so then Rillaboom has to go right back out in order to be threatening that switch in again. Doesn't necessarily have to do it right here, since the Miraidon's in trouble and we see the fake out instead.
Ooh, critical hit fake out into the Miraidon as Whimsicott will lock Zamazenta into Heavy Slam. That will prevent it from dealing good damage to the Miraidon, but does still threaten the Whimsicott, which takes this Heavy Slam for a one-hit KO. The benefit here is that it will likely force that Zamazenta out after this turn, because it just can't do anything to this Miraidon if it's locked into Heavy Slam.
Yeah, maybe not the worst thing in the world. I mean, obviously, we'd love to get the Tailwind up before you get knocked out, but Whimsicott, not taking exerting a whole lot of offensive pressure, and now that this Zamazenta has kind of been weakened by being forced into this non-optimal move, you got to do something with the switch, right? Just having to switch yourself isn't a great way to cash in on that. So now the Miraidon with the correct terrain, at least for now, although the odds of a Rillaboom coming in fairly high when you're forced into switching anyway. And Lunala also in a position where it gets an attack off here, but facing down Incineroar, no longer being threatened by an Encore, although I guess it wouldn't have been anyway as a Dark-type Pokemon, in a tricky but advantageous spot.
Yeah, it's going to be very interesting because, it feels like Luca has put himself into the speed sandwich if we consider that there could be a Calyrex in the back for Marco. There will just be the switch-in for the Incineroar. Rillaboom comes in to set up the grassy terrain, leaving the Zamazenta on the field. Happy to start continuing to hit those Heavy Slams potentially into that Lunala, at least break the Shadow Shield there as the Rillaboom comes in. Little bit of chip damage onto Lunala as Trick Room will be set up. And now we're in kind of an awkward position here for Luca.
Yeah, this is not like the most ideal of Trick Rooms where Miraidon, such a speedy Pokemon, likely to be moving last now, and with only the Urshifu left in the back, that's a pretty dangerous switch as well. You really don't want to let either of these Pokemon get a hold of it. Zamazenta, I guess, not going to do huge damage, but even without the type advantage, a Wood Hammer would really hurt here. No way to get the train back for this turn.
Yeah, well, there is the big Wood Hammer coming in from the Rillaboom. The Electric Seed doing a lot of work to protect Lunala from that damage as it will fire back a Moongeist beam right into that Rillaboom. Good damage onto that as well, as Heavy Slam continues to chip away at that Lunala, and the critical hit through the Electric Seed defense boost will knock that Pokemon out. Potentially a turn before Luca really would have wanted that to happen, as the Electro Drift will connect onto Zamazenta for a little bit over 50% damage there. But now, because of that critical hit, Urshifu is forced into the game.
Yeah, and critically, the Miraidon is forced to stay in as well, not going to be able to try to get an Electric Terrain back. Might have been a little challenging in this situation anyway, but Rillaboom going to win the Terrain War this time, and again, high potential. It's still slower / faster than the Pokemon on the other side of the field, able to threaten one more big Wood Hammer, and might even survive the recoil from doing so and kind of critically force one more attack to go into its slot.
Yeah, I think it would still have enough health to survive the recoil damage from Wood Hammer. And we've already seen that the Rillaboom was slower than Lunala, so most likely, like you mentioned, still the slowest thing on the field. So going first here in Trick Room. And that's going to be really difficult for Luca. Did not get a whole lot of value out of that Whimsicott at all, and instead is just kind of on the back foot. Maybe if that critical hit hadn't come through, the timing would have been a little bit better, but without it, the timing is just a little bit off for Luca here, as Marco goes for the Terastallization into the Water type.
Yeah, always a little cheeky when you're going for the Water Terastallization in front of a Miraidon, but maybe going to be enough here to survive this Surging Strikes, get one more attack off, and that could be enough for Marco to be in a position where the game is relatively closed.
Yeah, these Surging Strikes are not enough to break through the now Water-type Zamazenta, as it shrugs off that damage from the Choice Band Urshifu. Body Press into Miraidon will not pick up the KO, but it will also still survive this turn, as Miraidon will just follow up with a Electro Drift into Rillaboom, but not enough damage once again. Every little piece of hit points counts for these games.
It seems like some very defensively trained here Pokemon here, and yeah, that's a big deal, right? Where this, even though there would normally sort of be the threat of, I guess you can't even Aqua Check. It's choice. So yeah, I mean that's tough. We're gonna see the forfeit get locked in here, and that was a bit of a disastrous game too for our defending world champion. We seemed to switch up his strategy from that first game that he had won because things were a little bit shaky, but I didn't really see what he was going for there. Right? He had both of his speed control options. Wasn't able to use one, the other one actively worked against him, and we kind of see the weakness of these mixed speed control teams. It's great if everything lines up the way that you want it to, but your Trick Rooming without the Ursaluna even selected that time did not look so good.
Absolutely, and the Whimsicott, like you mentioned, I'm not sure what Luca was going for there, because all of Luca's Pokemon are outspeeding the important Pokemon on Marco's side without Tailwind. So you're really looking at getting, Moonblast pressure and Encore especially, which is really powerful when you have a bunch of fake out users like Rillaboom coming in. And of course, like you mentioned, Incineroar can't be Encored, but clearly Luca had a plan there with the Whimsicott, but just couldn't quite make it happen.
Yeah, I mean, the critical hit may have mattered there, right? Where I guess I might think about this a little more. I think the assumption is that the final Pokemon is a Calyrex. If you can very easily double tap that under Trick Room, kind of just eliminate it. So the game probably much closer than it looks there, where if it gets on the field, it probably doesn't make a difference. However, there is still 2 Pokemon remaining on Marco's side, and even though the Calyrex would have been relatively easy to deal with, that does still potentially require 2 targets. Only one if it's an Urshifu in an optimal situation, maybe. And yeah, that was a lot of actions that Luca just didn't have remaining there. The flip side, at least briefly, the Whimsicott sort of got him into a better position there. But yeah, I wonder if maybe there was a one Pokemon selection difference would have made that a little more advantageous, or just trying to play a slower slug it out game, because in the first game, I think Incineroar did such a good job of controlling the Rillaboom, who I think is a really critical poke of this matchup. And yeah, I think you probably either need the Intimidate or to be a little bit more militant about making sure you win the terrain battle.
Well, Luca has opted not to win the terrain battle here in Game 3, going back to Game 1 leads with the Miraidon and Lunala. The electric terrain will be set, activate Lunala's Electric Seed to boost its defense, which has been really critical for Luca's team. That Lunala has tanked so many physical attacks thanks to that Electric Seed, but will lose the terrain immediately, as Rillaboom will set the grassy terrain with its Grassy Surge.
Yeah, so it's interesting where even though the train battle went to Marco, we kind of seen this is the formation that worked for Luca the first time. We've seen there's a little adjustment from that Game 1 plan, where somewhere between Game 1 and Game 2 on Luca's side of the field, where Marco's, I guess we don't even know exactly what his plan was. It's possible Calyrex did even come last game, although I would assume it's fairly unlikely.
Yeah, absolutely. Would be a very big... Would have been a big play to leave Calyrex at home in Game 2. But we are going to see Whimsicott coming back in here. That's going to tank a fake out and tank a body press from the Zamazenta. And oh boy, Luca got what he wanted. Those are two juicy encore targets right now as Zamazenta takes that Moongeist beam.
Yeah, I like this a lot more. It's a very awkward position now for Marco to play out. We have to be concerned about either side potentially getting encored. The Moongeist beam could do a bunch of damage out of these Pokemon. Luca also has the option, instead of bringing that Miraidon back in, kind of knowing these pressure these Pokemon, is likely to see some switches, could at least temporarily get the terrain back and maybe prevent any cheeky Grassy Glide trying to sneak in there. But yeah, once again, neither side really has a major advantage here. Rillaboom is going to exit the field, and let's have to see what comes in.
Well, we are going to have the Incineroar coming back out on the field. Happily tanks and most of the attacks coming out from Lunala. Of course, though, Marco is not running the Assault Vest variant. It will be instead the Rocky Helmet as Encore connects onto the Zamazenta, blocking it into Body Press. Still deals good damage to Whimsicott, but Whimsicott is able to hang on. And critically, that means that Zamazenta can't do anything to this Lunala but take Moongeist beams to the face.
Yeah, I think that's a nice little play there. Zamazenta definitely in KO range of this Moongeist beam, although close enough where a number of switches, perhaps in Grassy Terrain activations, could allow it to get out of that range much later in the game. For now, though, probably going to need to switch out here. So, yeah, what can Luca do to take advantage of that? The Incineroar also looks a little bit awkward where that Shadow Shield isn't broken, but you could also try to go for a knockout with Fake Out if it wanted to on the Whimsicott.
Yeah, the powerful fake outs into a Whimsicott, but not going for it, will instead go for a bigger attack with the knockoff, as Moongeist Beam from Lunala will connect on to that Rillaboom on the switch and finally force the Zamazenta out now under Tailwind, and actually not going for an attack at all, instead the Parting Shot. If Incineroar can't fake something out, it will just get out of the field, make way for one of the other Pokemon in the back.
Yeah, kind of a meaningful parting shot, too, there. That's probably already enough where if Marco wanted to bring Zamazenta back in, although it doesn't really make much sense here, would have the option of surviving a Moongeist Beam now. So it would be the Calyrex, who would take significantly more from a Moongeist Beam, but also threatening a lot more damage and could try to pick up the knockout on that low HP Whimsicott.
Yeah, but now the Tailwind has been set up, so Luca has the speed advantage even against this Calyrex Shadow Rider on Marco's side. You can see this is a little bit of what Luca wanted in that game too, just couldn't quite position it.
I think on Marco said you kind of want to slow play this too, right? Where eventually you would like to take the knockout on that Whimsicott. I think taking it this turn is probably too soon, where I would give Luca a free switch where he could really try to take advantage of this, where I think probably more likely so like protect him the Calyrex, try to cycle the other slot, maybe slow things down a little bit and try maybe the second to last turn of Trick Room or something, you go for a knockout.
Well, that's going to be the Whimsicott protected by Switch, and the Incineroar makes an appearance once again. Critical Pokemon in Game 1 to control the damage output of that Rillaboom, and even the Incineroar and Zamazenta on Marco's side, countered by an Incineroar of Marco's own. So Rillaboom intimidated, Luca's Incineroar intimidated, and now this parting shotted Lunala will be able to start going on the offensive. Goes for the Terrestrialization, that is the Fairy Terra type to resist any Dark type attacks and boost the Moonblast, which will be could deal good damage to that Incineroar even through the parting shot. Targeting instead is onto the Incineroar on the switch in, so gets a little bit of decent damage there as Rillaboom will bounce back once more. Revolving door style into Marco's hands as the choice between Zamazenta or Calyrex here to stall out these turns of Tailwind.
Yeah, it winds up kind of just being a little poke onto the Incineroar. Kind of a great job by Calyrex there. It doesn't actually do anything, but its presence does kind of encourage that Lunala to change its typing there and get the Terrestrialization out of the way. And I kind of feel like this is sort of what we've seen from these Tailwind Trick Room teams a little bit, where like, you gotta get in the field, you get your speed control up, and then, oh, I'm fighting against Incineroar and Rillaboom, and nothing's really in any danger of being knocked out, so it doesn't matter who's going first.
Yeah, there's no danger of anything being knocked out, and I don't even know if I'm going to get to play a turn.
Yeah, we're slowly but surely here, and I think, think in general that's probably to Marco's advantage. Not only is helping stall out this Tailwind a little bit, but the grassy terrain healing the Pokemon on Marco's side of the field. He's taken more damage, and I think also damage on more important Pokemon. So the low HP Whimsicott probably not going to be able to take any attacks the rest of this game no matter what, where the healing on Marco's Pokemon could really make a difference as this game continues on.
Yeah, absolutely, especially if that Zamazenta was within range of another Moongeist Beam with the parting shots and with grassy terrain healing, especially if Marco can reset the terrain after it expires after this turn. Pretty good odds there for Zamazenta to be able to get at least one, maybe two more attacks off unless Miraidon comes in, and that opens up the other offensive threat on Luca's side to that chip damage and being whittled down by this really sturdy core on Marco's team. Finally, though, the Calyrex Shadow Rider will terrestrialize into the Dark typing. Marco will not be allowing any free Moongeist Beams here, doubly so with the Fake Out. So Lunala will not be able to move. Calyrex gets an Astral Barrage off onto both of these Pokemon. Lunala and Incineroar tank it pretty well, even with that critical hit on Incineroar. You can see all of the help that the Assault Vest is offering there, as Incineroar will retreat, and means that now Luca has an opportunity to either bring back in the Whimsicott and set Tailwind, or take control of the terrain once again.
Yeah, Miraidon potentially getting a pretty free shot here. Been a lot of cycling, but U-turning instead of going for perhaps a knockout there, which maybe Marco was expecting, going to allow finally control of the terrain, at least for half of a turn here, although I think it's fairly likely we'll see the Rillaboom come back in. We are on the final turn of the Tailwind, so Lunala and Miraidon sort of threaten a big offense, but there's a caveat to both of them, right? The Lunala's taking that parting shot, the Miraidon has to play around the potential of a Rillaboom coming back in, and the Calyrex still sitting there being a little cheeky. We've seen it dodge a Moonblast twice, once by switching out and one through the help of its partner faking it out, and Luca's going to have to get a couple reads right here to take advantage. For now, switching Lunala out and resetting that parting shot debuff.
Yeah, important for the Lunala to maintain its offensive options as it loses its defense boost from the Electric Seed by switching out as well. Incineroar will switch in, Marco's Calyrex will switch out, and that means that there is the Rillaboom once more coming in. As soon as Miraidon joins the field, Rillaboom comes out to meet it. And here goes Luca. Has the opportunity to go on the offensive now because Marco has gone for a double switch. No damage coming out from Marco. Instead, Zamazenta coming out now, trying to sneak in some extra healing, but no good. Volt Switch will pick that KO up. Zamazenta finally goes down.
Sort of an interesting situation, though, where as much as it might have been nice to try to get the Zamazenta healthy enough to do something again, this is a pretty critical free switch. Whimsicott almost certainly going to go immediately for a Tailwind here, which you could try to stop, but also a free switch for Marco's side of the field, right? Where you just go for something like bringing Calyrex in here and maybe just like double attacking and seeing if you can move your way out from there, maybe picking up a couple of knockouts.
Potentially, but critically, by switching the Lunala out to both reset its offense and defense, Incineroar got to come in. So there is also fake out pressure on the Incineroar side, meaning there is nothing safe here. Now that the Calyrex has terrestrialized into the Dark typing, you can see Marco is having to make some really difficult decisions because this positioning is what's going to matter the most.
And I said earlier it's unlikely that the healing on the Whimsicott was going to make a big difference.
I think it does now.
We were half joking before about the option of a big fake out going for the knockout. I think that the Whimsicott is now safe. Perhaps the world's biggest critical hit fake out could actually be game changing here. But Whimsicott, probably with that covert float, will not flinch to a fake out and should be able to survive it with this amount of HP. And I think one more Tailwind potentially puts Luca in a pretty good spot. So it's been a long and grinding game. That first Tailwind didn't get a whole lot done other than removing the Zamazenta and forcing both sides terrestrializations, but perhaps that second Tailwind is really going to be the one that gets this game closed out.
Yeah, and that is sometimes what's important about these teams. If you can preserve your Whimsicott to get the second Tailwind up, that's when you can finally start going on the offensive. But I love this play by Marco to go for the nasty plot instead of going on the offensive. That means Whimsicott is stuck on the field and Luca's going to have to waste time repositioning, and Marco got a huge boost right there.
It's a non-conventional use of the Dark Terror type as well, but Whimsicott, much like the Incineroar, unable to use an Encore onto this now Dark type Calyrex.
Incredible.
And it's a great move too, right? Where a knockout is certainly to Luca's advantage. Now if his Tailwind turns being wasted, do you try to go for a hard switch here? Do you go for a Light Screen? Maybe you go for a super effective Moonblast, which would be powerful, but maybe not super impactful. On Marco's side, you could now just go for a Protect on the Calyrex if you think that Luca's going to be afraid of switching one of his own restricted Pokemon in. You'd love to get your own Rillaboom back out because there's at least a small window here where Miraidon would be able to take control of the terrain again. But Marco's did a really nice job of slow playing this one. Kind of just, it's not, you don't necessarily get ahead by taking knockouts in this game. A really masterful play there by not getting greedy.
Well, and a really safe play there to go for the light screen to set that up to negate a little bit of the damage of this now boosted Astral Barrage. But it's not enough. That's a double KO onto the Whimsicott and onto the Incineroar. And that means that it's going to be Lunala and Miraidon coming in under Trick Room and under the light screen, while the Calyrex is now at +4.
So you said Trick Room, but it's Tailwind. But
Tailwind, yes.
I think you're thinking the right place because we're in sort of an interesting situation here where I think if there was no Trick Room on the Lunala, the endgame to me is pretty simple. On Marco's side, you switch the Rillaboom out, you protect the Calyrex, you go for a fake out of the next turn and just start launching Astral Barrages. The counter to that is trying to find the right time to get a Trick Room perhaps on Luca's side, really take advantage finally of that to get your Lunala slower than the opposing Calyrex. However, we saw what happened previously where then it just caused the Rillaboom to win the game. So we'll have to see if Luca can finish this one off this time. Now at a Pokemon disadvantage with a speed control advantage against a Calyrex with 4 levels of increased special attack.
Yeah, that is so scary, and the light screen will be doing something, but it may not be able to do enough here. Is really threatening, though, to have Tailwind and the electric terrain up.
The other thing to keep in mind here is that there is still the wide guard threat from Lunala. So not quite so simple as just hitting the buttons. There will be some trading necessary here, but definitely some mind games. The Calyrex is going to give up the boost, though. I love that play in the sense that likely not what Luca's expecting, but that's a big, big give.
Yeah, it takes a really strong and confident trainer to give up your +4 Calyrex and just switch it out. This Electro Drift will connect onto the Rillaboom, deals good damage thanks to the electric terrain still being active. And here comes the Terra boosted Moonblast from Lunala, connects onto the Incineroar on the switch in. Almost picks up the KO, but not quite enough, and Rillaboom is able to switch out with the U-turn, bringing Calyrex back out on the field.
So it's a little painful, but this will give Marco a path toward getting the terrain control back. And it's a little bit more dangerous than perhaps that he would have hoped, where you'd love to go for a fake out here, but if you do, it's like a fake out switch is a pretty tough play to make here. We're going to wind up taking a bunch more damage, so it'll be exciting to see what Marco goes for, but does get the Rillaboom out, only 2 Pokemon remaining, so the option for the terrain control, we'll have to see what he'll have to pay to get it.
Exactly. Will it be the Incineroar? Will it be the Calyrex? What will it be that Marco has to give up to regain control of the terrain? Will it just be momentum? Just switch one of these Pokemon out into Rillaboom and give up one of your turns here in these final turns of this deciding Game 3.
Yeah, I think obviously the Calyrex is the great prize if you can get it here. Would remove all of the speed control related complications, but this is just such a tense turn. Rillaboom could feasibly come into either slot. It is the Calyrex, the more likely play here, I would say, with not wanting to risk such a powerful Pokemon. The terrain going to swap. The damage from Miraidon going to be decreased, and we'll get a little bit more healing perhaps in what has been a very defensively oriented set.
Yeah, but the healing goes both ways. The Lunala and Miraidon will also be gaining health back from the grassy terrain. There's the Electro Drift into Rillaboom. Still good damage. I think Rillaboom might be able to survive one more Electro Drift after this grassy terrain recovery goes off, though. And once more, threatens fake out pressure onto both of these Pokemon. Could allow that Calyrex to get back in as Tailwind peters out here.
Yeah, really going to need a little bit more damage here, where, especially with the light screen still up, just the Calyrex not in a position where, even if we're to come in safely with Trick Room expired, where I think you could reasonably expect it to clean the game up. Even a tiny bit of damage could make a big difference. Miraidon not the most defensively sturdy Pokemon in the game, but Lunala kind of is, especially with the light screen there.
Yeah, and this is a really awkward moment to have the Incineroar and the Rillaboom out. You are able to threaten to prevent Trick Room with Fake Out here. Ooh, but actually just a helping hand coming out from the Incineroar onto the Rillaboom. That's going to be a helping hand Fake Out. deals big damage. That would have knocked out that Whimsicott, I tell you what, as the Electro Drift connects onto Incineroar, and that may be exactly what Marco wants and needs, a free switch in to the Calyrex in the back.
Yeah, I'm not sure I've ever seen a helping hand fake out before, but extremely correct play though, right? Needed to fake out the Lunala in order to give the Rillaboom one more action the next turn. Incineroar had no path toward acting normally anyway, so why not take a little bit more damage that fake out, potentially putting it in knockout range for a Astral Barrage on the next turn, and allowing Rillaboom to attack once more, likely with a Grassy Glide, to further weaken one of these Pokemon and try to open the door for Calyrex to steal the game away from our world champion at the final turn.
All right, it all comes down to this last moment here. If Calyrex is able to pick up these KOs with Astral Barrage, I believe we still have a turn of Light Screen left, or it may be just faded. I may have missed that reading there, but if we have Light Screen up, you're tempted to block and stall just a little bit here.
Yeah, and don't forget there's still the threat of Wide Guard, right? You can't just safely click an Astral Block. Maybe you make the read like, oh, he knows that I won't, so I will. But yeah, I mean, also, big single target option, right? You can't really ignore either of these Pokemon. We've seen the damage Rillaboom can do. Lunala is certainly in range of a Wood Hammer and perhaps even a couple of Grassy Glides. So important for both sides to get the read right. This could all come down to this turn.
Here's the Wide Guard from Lunala, protecting both the Miraidon and Lunala from the Astral Barrage. Grassy Glide from Rillaboom connects onto Lunala, not enough to pick up the KO, and the Astral Barrage hits into the Wide Guard, which means Luca is able to fire off another huge Electro Drift from this Miraidon. Of course, it does not have the electric terrain, which means it does not have all of the huge boosts attached to it. Connects onto the Calyrex, and not enough! Calyrex Shadow Rider once more with single-digit health, hanging on for dear life and hanging on for the undefeated record for Marco Silva heading into our 7th round of Swiss.
What a fascinating situation. The Light Screen will expire, and we wind up in a strange situation here where a Grassy Glide from Rillaboom at this turn would knock out the Lunala. However, only 2 turns left of the Grassy Terrain, which may be just enough. And the Calyrex, we've seen a number of items of this Pokemon, often focus sessions. This one is a Life Orb. It's right at the point where Recoil could potentially knock it out. It's going to protect because of that. See if it can have its friend Rillaboom pick up a knockout first.
Yeah, protect here, get the recovery on the Grassy Terrain. Lunala with another Wide Guard just to make sure that there are no sneaky Astral Barrages, as Grassy Glide will pick up that KO onto Lunala. This will likely end us in a situation with Calyrex Shadow Rider staring down a solo Miraidon, as this Electro Drift will connect onto the Rillaboom here. Actually, Rillaboom hangs on all of those turns of Grassy Terrain, adding up, and Marco is going to get 2 shots at this Miraidon to deal the damage that he needs to win this game.
Yeah, well, this could be really exciting if the Rillaboom been knocked out there. Look a little safer now. Calyrex will survive now its own Life Orb, so it's going to need to be targeted, as will this Rillaboom. Now it gets to use its more powerful Astral Barrage with no Wide Guard available.
That's big damage, that's 10 hit points, and that's not enough to survive the follow-up from Rillaboom, as the Electro Drift from Miraidon connects down onto the Calyrex, picks up that final little bit of HP, as Marco Silva knocks out the world champions Miraidon here, advances at 6-0 here in our Swiss rounds.
Yeah, it's Wood Hammer going to come down now, finish this match off for paperwork's sake, but it was kind of all determined that previous couple of turns. What an amazing match between 2 of the very best players in the world.
And that's exactly why they're 2 of the very best players. That's why when we saw that matchup on the pairings, there was no question. And this is what's so great about the Italian community. You can see both of them talking about this match, going back and forth, working together, and, just 2 brilliant Pokemon minds right there.
Yeah, I think it was a really masterfully played set as well. Some interesting adjustments at both sides.